and now as eBay's in-house ODR person, and he's going to give us some of his insights into the field in general and on eBay's own program. Thanks.
All right, great. Boy, no matter what happens in this presentation, that introduction was worth it. So, hello everyone. Michael, I don't know if I can prevail upon you to direct the camera out to everybody else in class, because I'd like to ask a question or two. I look walking this technology through. There we go. Wow. Good morning. Hello. I'm looking at all of you. All right, great. So, by a show of hands, how many people here have bought something on eBay? Oh, you're breaking my heart. Oh, I got two in the back. Two people in the back. Great. Excellent. Well, it's funny because Orna was just mentioning that we were at this conference in Cairo, and in the United States, eBay is omnipresent. It's on TV, it's on radio, all the time. People are always talking about eBay. So when you do a presentation, you never have to answer the question, what is eBay? How does eBay work? Pretty much everybody's got that figured out. But then I go to Cairo, and I'm in this session, and I say, okay, well, I work for eBay. Blank stares. Nobody had ever heard of eBay. I said, does everyone know what eBay is? No. So then I start giving my presentation, and they're not interested in online dispute resolution at all. What they're really interested in is, what's eBay? How does eBay work? Wow, that sounds really cool. So I trust that you guys pretty much know what eBay is. Right? Nod if you know what eBay is.
We have an Israeli equivalent. How many of you have purchased on Walla shops or... Yeah. We would probably see more hands there.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll take a couple seconds. So, Orna, are there slides in front of everybody right now, or should I just speak to other things for a few minutes?
I'll let you know when the slides...
Okay, great. So let me just talk briefly about what eBay is and kind of why it's perfectly positioned to be an online dispute resolution leader, or at least one of the companies that would be in the online dispute resolution space first. So eBay is what we call it the world's largest marketplace. It essentially it's an auction house. And on eBay at any given time, we have millions and millions of items for sale. Now, the main way that stuff gets listed on eBay is in an auction format. So a seller decides they want to sell something, they list it on the eBay site, they provide a picture, they provide a description, they can choose a starting price, and then they put it out there on the internet. And then people from all over the world can come and they can view that item, and they can bid on it. And they can say, boy, I'd be willing to pay $2 for that. And somebody else says, well, I'd be willing to pay $3. So then the price goes up and up and up, like a standard auction. Now, eBay is counting down all the time how much time is left in that auction. And whoever has the highest price at the point when that auction ends, they win the item. And they're obliged to pay the seller. Now, that's a standard auction. And that makes up the bulk of the listings on eBay. But eBay now has other formats that we sell stuff in too. We sell buy it now items, which is traditional, just the traditional store kind of thing. You walk in, you see an item, there's the price, you pay it, you get the item. And we've got other formats as well that people can buy and sell things in. But essentially that's what it is. Now the beauty of eBay is, eBay doesn't have anything for sale by eBay. I work in this big corporate headquarters here. We have no products. We don't sell widgets, we don't sell anything. All the stuff that's for sale on eBay is sold by members, sold by the community, sold by sellers. So sometimes I'll get an email from a newbie buyer, a buyer who's recently registered on the site. And they'll say, when is eBay going to ship my item, my figurine or my Beanie Baby out of the eBay warehouse? I really want to get it. And you have to take a step back and say, okay, you don't really understand the way eBay works. Here's the way eBay works. So our job here at eBay, all the thousands of people around here, is to make sure that the marketplace is running smoothly. We don't push products, we don't choose inventory, none of that stuff. So that means we're tasked with looking at what keeps the marketplace healthy. And a big part of that is making sure that disputes can be resolved. Providing a redress channel is a very, very important aspect of maintaining a healthy marketplace. And that's not the only thing we do at eBay. There's a lot of other stuff we have to do in terms of building tools and enabling communication back and forth between buyers and sellers, making sure that people can find the items that they're looking for, and also getting the bad guys. There's a lot of bad guys out there that would love to take advantage of eBay members. But one key component of what we call at eBay trust and safety is redress, providing a workable redress process for buyers and sellers who find themselves in a transaction dispute. So, now, before I came to eBay, my practice area, my face-to-face practice area, was actually public dispute resolution, multi-party dispute resolution. So I dealt with energy disputes, environmental disputes, land use, zoning, things like that, waterway disputes. And I must admit, when I wrote a book on online dispute resolution, and I thought, e-commerce dispute resolution is not that complicated. You're usually dealing with two strangers. The value of the transaction is not that much, maybe $50, $100, $150. They don't really have a relationship to preserve per se. They're probably never going to interact with each other again. So I kind of thought, e-commerce disputes. Well, one of the things about eBay is that what eBay disputes lack in terms of complexity, they more than make up for in terms of volume. eBay has more than 35 million disputes that we have to resolve around the world in 16 different languages. So the pure volume of disputes that we have to wrestle with makes this quite a challenge. And it makes it so that we can't really solve this problem with people. We can't just hire enough mediators and arbitrators to go out and resolve all these disputes. That's not in the cards. So what we have to do is, and I'm not sure if you guys have seen Ethan Katch's book, Online Dispute Resolution, but he talks in that book about technology as the fourth part. So technology can kind of act as a mediator, and that's what we do, is we write software programs that buyers and sellers can use to resolve their concerns. And we resolve the vast majority of our disputes through those software programs. And then, if the problem still exists, there's still an impasse, then what we do is we can intervene and play more of an arbitrator role. So I'm kind of all over the map there, but do people have a pretty good idea of what eBay is? Yes, I'm looking at you, so you have to nod if you do understand what eBay is. Okay, good.
Most people seem to have a good. Did you get the numbers? 35 million disputes in 16 languages. I'm just making sure.
Yeah, that is an impressive stat. Actually, I'll show you some more, but we sell about 500 million items per quarter on eBay. So we're talking about maybe 2 billion items sold on the site every year around the world. eBay currently has 185 million users. So if you counted up all those users as citizens, which admittedly is an apples to oranges comparison, but if you counted them up as citizens, we would now be the 6th largest country in the world. We just passed Russia and we're gunning for Brazil. And we're still growing at a pretty quick pace. So, eBay is very, very large. It was hard when I first showed up here to really wrap my brain around these numbers. I mean, the size of the marketplace is so overwhelming. One of the things we have at eBay, which is a very powerful tool for ensuring that buyers and sellers do the right thing by each other, is a reputation system, and we call it the feedback system. And essentially what that means is if you engage in a transaction with a buyer or a seller, say you're selling an item and somebody buys an item from you, or the other way around, you actually have the ability to leave a comment about that transaction. And that comment is public, and it becomes part of the other user's permanent record, what we call their feedback score. So if you had a positive interaction with them, you can give them a positive, which increases their score by 1. If you had a neutral experience, then you can give them a neutral, and then that doesn't affect their score. And if you have a negative experience, you can give a negative, that affects their score by -1. So you see next to everyone's name on eBay, you see their feedback score. And you also see their feedback percentage, the percentage of their overall feedback, which is positive. Now, this system is very, very powerful because before something like this was created, the internet was the Wild West. You can change your identity as easily as you change your email address. It's not that hard. So you go out and defraud 100 people, and they can all post terrible things about you, and then you change your username or change your email address, and for all intents and purposes, you're a whole new person. So the genius of eBay, and the guy who started eBay was a guy named Piero Midio about 10 years ago. He said, we need a system that's going to establish somebody's reputation and it's going to attach it to that person so that then we know whether or not that person is trustworthy. And that's the beauty of eBay. Feedback is it's turned out to be a very accurate predictor of whether or not the other side is going to do the right thing by you in a transaction. So feedback also is a powerful incentive for people to work out their problems. Because if they don't work out their problems, they know they're going to get a negative. And sellers understand that getting a negative has a very clear impact on their bottom line. It means they're not going to be able to sell as much stuff, and the stuff that they do sell is going to come in at a lower price. So, this is eBay in a nutshell. I got some pictures that can illustrate it. Warren, how are we doing on the slides?
We still haven't gotten the projector. I'm wondering if you can actually transmit the slides to us. Would that...
You know, I unfortunately can't do that. I wish there's got to be some sneaky way to do it. Well, it's no big deal. I mean, I can make word pictures.
We'll get it in a few minutes. Colin, perhaps you can also start with how you got to ODR, and maybe give us a little bit of background on that.
You know what I'm going to do? I will do that. I'm definitely going to start with that. But I'm also going to go into kind of the roots of online dispute resolution, because I think that's interesting. And then maybe we could talk also about how online dispute resolution grew out of alternative dispute resolution.
Perfect.
Because obviously, online dispute resolution is much newer. It's really only been around, I guess, maybe 6 or 7 years. Wow, it's coming up on 7 years. That's starting to sound like a long time in internet age. But obviously, face-to-face dispute resolution has been around a lot longer. At least in the United States, face-to-face dispute resolution for transactions emerged pretty much in the 70s. There was a community dispute resolution movement. Frank Sander wrote the paper on the multi-York courthouse. There was a longer tradition of dispute resolution, particularly in labor relations in the United States. And if you go back to around the time of the First World War, there was a lot of talk about arbitration. The League of Nations was supposed to be based upon open agreements openly arrived at. Arbitration was going to be the core mechanism for world order, in a sense. But really, that was adopted back in the early 20th century, at least in the United States. Labor relations were really the key social issue. There were tons of disputes in that area. So there was a lot of dispute resolution that emerged in the labor sector. But then in the 70s, it turned into kind of a community movement. And then there was this neighborhood dispute resolution movement, which got a lot of ground. That turned into peer mediation in schools. It turned into divorce mediation, which is probably the #1 form of mediation in the United States now. It turned into public dispute resolution, which is my practice area. I'm not actually a lawyer, but I've been in the dispute resolution field for, I guess, coming up on 13 or 14 years at this point. And there is a vibrant dispute resolution field of people who practice dispute resolution in a bunch of different areas. So, long story short, I worked for the National Institute for Dispute Resolution in Washington, D.C., and the Consensus Building Institute in Cambridge. And I was also, as you can probably tell just by looking at me, I was a big geek. I love technology. I love computers. There were no intersections between, really, dispute resolution and computers when I was first started in the field, which would have been late 80s, early 90s. But round about really, when the internet started to be applied to commerce, which I guess is 95, 96, 97, there started to be more talk about, what are we going to do about the conflicts that arise online? We had disputes prior to that online. I actually ran a bulletin board, a dial-up 300 baud modem bulletin board out of my bedroom when I was a kid in like 1980. And we had disputes. We definitely had disputes. People would dial into my computer and they would post messages. They would get into fights. We called them flame wars. Now, what flame wars were, they weren't about commerce. They were just people that got angry at each other. And they started posting angry messages, and it created conflict. It created strife in these online communities, these early communities. So it was only really in 95, 96, 97 when we started to see commerce being done online that people started to think, well, in the face-to-face world, when we have a transaction dispute, we need to figure out a way to work it out. And the mechanisms that we use to do that are probably the #1 mechanism that people think of are the courts. We have all these courts all over the United States, all over the world, for people to resolve disputes that emerge in the course of business, in the course of their daily lives. But when you started to think about these new kinds of disputes that were emerging online, you couldn't really figure out a way that courts were going to work. For instance, if I'm here in California, and I purchase an item off of a website which is based in Peru, in Lima, and the seller is in, Berlin, how is the court system going to help us at all? It's not going to help us. Courts are entirely based on geography. They're based on jurisdiction. And enforcement is based on physical presence. It's based on location. So like I was talking about before, if you can change your identity as easily as you can change your email address, a court is not going to know what to do with you. And you can't just take the court system, the judicial system, and then replicate it online. You can't have e-judges and e-jails and e-policemen. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So people started to say, well, how are we going to solve this problem? There were all of these futurist writers who were talking about, what's going to happen on the internet? How big is this going to be? It's going to be trillions and trillions of dollars. This is going to be the heart of global commerce is going to happen online, but it's not going to happen if people don't trust the transactions. And the only way they're going to trust the transactions is if they actually have a redress path. So that was the motivation for the real launch of online dispute resolution. And I would say that happened in the 97, 98, 99 time frame. And then, all of a sudden, there was all this venture capital investment money rattling around in the United States. Everybody was excited about the internet. So what you saw was tons of online dispute resolution companies sprung up out of nowhere in 1999 and 2000. And I'm the first to admit I was one of those companies to spring up out of nowhere. We all thought this was going to be a billion dollar niche, essentially creating the judicial infrastructure for the internet. And I think that is happening, but it's taking a lot longer than we thought it was going to take back in 99, 2000. I mean, the whole internet is slowly growing, it's expanding, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a long time. So online dispute resolution originally emerged as a way to resolve disputes that arose growing out of e-commerce between people who had no possibility of getting together face-to-face. So, I'll tell you another anecdote. I spent a lot of time talking about online dispute resolution at mediation conferences. And you get some very interesting body language. I don't know if you guys have studied body language and nonverbal communication in the course of your studies at the law school there, but one of the things that we do when we do dispute resolution training is reading somebody's face and reading someone's physical demeanor to get a sense. And it's very interesting, when I talk to mediators, face-to-face mediators about ODR, you get very interesting body language. I'll try and demonstrate some of what I would see. You get a lot of this. You get a lot of, cross the legs, cross the arms. Looking in a different direction. I don't know. Lots of skepticism. The dispute resolution field, they didn't buy it. They didn't buy online dispute resolution. I remember I met with one of the giants of face-to-face public dispute resolution in the United States, a guy named Larry Susskind at Massachusetts Institute for Technology. And I said, Larry, I want to get into online dispute resolution. And he said, that is a waste of your time. Online dispute resolution is nonsense. It's never going to amount to anything. To do dispute resolution, you've got to sit in the room with someone. You've got to sit across the table from them. You've got to look in their eyes. If you can't do that, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of. So now I'm really looking forward to seeing Larry in the fall and telling him we've done 35 million disputes last year on eBay. So that will be my goal. Yes, Orna.
We have the projector. We haven't received your mail yet. Can we send it?
Sure. So should I send it to Michael again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Let me see here. No problem. Sorry for the technological.
Part of the barriers, right?
That's right. We are demonstrating limitations of technology.
There was a question here. Someone was unclear.
Please.
Someone was unclear. Do you want to answer your question on why people changing IDs wouldn't be a problem on eBay?
Wouldn't be a problem on eBay?
Yeah.
Well, it actually is. Yeah, it is a problem on eBay. It's a big challenge that we wrestle with. A lot of the bad guys, they will constantly change their IDs. But there are a lot of sneaky things that eBay can do to figure out that two seemingly unrelated IDs are in fact related. And it's very interesting, actually, to dive into the world of combating the fraudsters. That's not what I do. I work on the problems that emerge between buyers and sellers who are participating in the transaction in good faith. But occasionally, I definitely run across disputes where one, either the buyer or the seller, is not participating in good faith, and they're trying to game the system, and they're trying to get value that they're not entitled to. And there are whole teams of people here at eBay that are devoted to combating the efforts of those fraudsters, as we refer to them. And one of those things is dealing with the multiple ID changing phenomenon. And it's a bit of an arms race to stay out of it. So I think it's going to remain a big challenge online. But one thing that we have noticed on eBay is once you get a reputation, once you build a profile, you get a username, you start to get lots of feedback. There's a lot of value in that. And it's not an easy thing. You can register a lot of IDs, but you're going to have low feedback on all those IDs. To get an ID that has high feedback, that takes a lot of time. It takes years. It takes a lot of commitment. And that's one of the reasons why the feedback system is proven to be such a good indicator of the trustworthiness of another party. So, I think you do put your finger on one of the key challenges of the internet is how can we establish identity, a lasting identity that follows someone around, and then also establish some reputation for that identity that means something.
And this
So-
really demonstrates the limits of ODR. Dealing with fraudsters is really beyond what ODR systems can handle, really, right?
Well, it's a good question. We're often asked in ODR to be the filter. So our job is not only to resolve the disputes that come in our door that can be resolved, but also to determine which situations should be flipped over the fence to the enforcement guys. Oftentimes, everything ends up in my bucket. For instance, the dispute resolution process that I built on eBay, everything comes in there. If a buyer is being defrauded by a criminal, that buyer is going to end up in my dispute resolution process. And we need to build a system that enables them to get to appropriate redress for their situation as quickly as possible. Because often time is of the essence with these fraudsters too. Somebody can get on eBay, maybe they hijack someone's account. I don't know if you've ever gotten a spoof email, any of you, that says, "Hi, I'm with eBay and PayPal, and your account needs to be updated. Please click on this link and log in." That's not really eBay or PayPal contacting you. What that is some criminal out there who's sending out billions and billions and billions of these emails, hoping to fool someone into entering their username and password so that they can then take over their account and then use their identity, essentially, and their feedback and their legitimacy to go defraud other people. So if somebody takes over an account and it's got, 10,000 feedback, and they sell a bunch of laptops that they don't have, and people send in checks for these laptops or transfer all the money to this person's bank account, and then they disappear, well, that's tough. That happens very quickly. We've got to find that person. We've got to identify that fraud as quickly as possible so that we can shut them down so they don't get more victims, and so that we can get them before they take off and disappear and cover up all their tracks. So it is very interesting, the relationship, and this is what I meant by dispute resolution is not trust and safety in and of itself. We have to work in concert with a lot of other efforts on the site, which also create a trustworthy environment on eBay. So that's a very interesting aspect for me, because normally in the dispute resolution field, we think about dispute resolution in a vacuum. But now that I've been on eBay, I realize that this is just one component of a broader strategy of trust building. So we have to figure out how to build our system so we can cooperate most intimately with these other mechanisms.
Colin, I'm going to ask you perhaps to focus your camera on your laptop, and maybe that would be the best way to see the slides.
Very tricky, very smart there, Lorna. Wow, okay. Let's see if that works. All right, let me bring it up here. All right, well, that means you guys aren't going to get the pleasure of seeing my big gap tooth grin in here anymore. So just remember it while I zoom you in. Okay, let's see. All right. Wow, this is going to work. Check it out.
Colin, another option is we can give you, it's probably too heavy for Michael to receive, we can give you an FTP, and you can send it
Yeah,
there.
I'll do that too, but how much time do we have left?
This works.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Can you guys see it? You don't get all the glory of the vivid colors, but as long as you read the text, that's what matters most.
That's fine. Okay.
I love it. Isn't it just amazing to think if this was 20 years ago, the notion that I would be having a video connection with you guys and you'd be looking at my computer. Anyway, I can't get past that. All right. So let me, I already talked to that. All right. So let me just blow through this a little bit. I've already spoken to it in kind of a peripheral way. But you can't see my natty graphic of the two hands shaking each other through the computer monitors. But I define online dispute resolution very broad, which is really any application of information and communications technology to help disputes work out their problems. So that means a teleconference, using the telephone, that's online dispute resolution. Using email, that's online dispute resolution. If you use technology with people in the room, that's online dispute resolution. For instance, if I was to be having a public dispute and all of you were participants in my process, I could give you all wirelessly networked laptops. And I could say, all right, let's brainstorm. What are the top issues we need to address? All of you could focus on your laptop. You could type in all your ideas. I would aggregate them in my server in front of the room. And then I would say, okay, here are the ideas. Boom. I would send everybody's ideas out to everyone in the room. And then I would say, okay, I want all of you to go through all these ideas and rank them 1 to 10. 10 being most important, 1 being least important. You have 2 minutes. Everybody goes through, they rank them, boom. I aggregate everything in the front. Here's the top 10 issues that we need to address. Now, if I had done that with a piece of flip chart paper and a marker, that could have taken a whole day. But using technology, we can charge ahead. We can make a lot of progress in a very short period of time. I think that's online dispute resolution. Even though everyone is there in the room, we're still using technology in a way to help people move toward agreement. So, all right, let's keep charging ahead. Now, talking about alternative dispute resolution, there's a couple key service types. People talk about negotiation, talk about mediation, which is really assisted negotiation, and then we talk about arbitration, which is essentially private judging. That's what we call it in the U.S. Well, online dispute resolution parallels a lot of those mechanisms. Now, when we first started out in ODR, we wanted to mimic all the face-to-face dispute resolution techniques online. So, if you had a mediation, I don't know what model you guys have been trained on, if you've been trained in mediation, but in the U.S. we talk about unassisted storytelling, then assisted storytelling, then brainstorming, then joint problem solving. So what we were going to do was we're going to take those exact steps and we're going to build an online process that are going to walk people through those exact steps. That's what we did back in the early days. Now what we discovered, once we did that for a while, was that some of the stuff that we do face-to-face works reasonably well online. But some of the stuff we do face-to-face really does not work well online. And I'll give you an example. Apologies are often very difficult to make work well online because it's often important to get the nonverbal communication. It's important to look into somebody's eyes. It's important to hear the tone of their voice. So online is not the best place to engage in emotional communications like that, in my opinion. However, there are also some things you can do online much more efficiently than you can do face-to-face. For instance, there's a model of dispute resolution called the single text model, which is where really the dispute resolution is organized around the creation of a joint document that is written between the two parties and the mediator, which attempts to establish an agreement that everyone can buy in on. Well, that's great for dispute resolution. Face-to-face online dispute resolution. Face-to-face communication is all about verbal. It's very difficult to turn that into a document. But online, you're communicating in language to begin with, in written language to begin with, so you're already halfway towards the creation of a document. So that's an example of some of the things that are done well online. So you'll see here also that the first stage is problem diagnosis. Online dispute resolution has the benefit of getting involved with disputes much earlier than face-to-face dispute resolution most of the time. So what that means is we can get in and help disputants determine whether or not they actually have a real problem, or whether or not they have reasonable expectations for what an appropriate outcome would be. So problem diagnosis, what we call pre-negotiation in the face-to-face world, is something we do really effectively online. And there's a lot of innovation that's happened in that space. So most of what we do at eBay is direct negotiation. We also have mediation partnerships, and I'm going to talk to you about Square Trade, one of those partners. And then we also do evaluation, which is, that's a review where a decision is rendered by a third party who's empowered to issue that decision. So, is any questions about this? Does this resonate with people? Everybody have an understanding of the basic techniques in dispute resolution? All right, Lorna, I'm relying on you. I'm getting blank stares. All right, silence is assent. That's my attitude. So I'm going to charge forward. But if you have any questions, you must grab Orna by the scruff of the neck and take the microphone out of her hand and then ask your question, all right?
Or you can wave.
Come on, enough of this dispute resolution stuff. Everybody thinks dispute resolution is all hugging and singing kumbaya. No, it can be tough. That's what I'm demonstrating. All right, so I've already talked to this. The rationale for online dispute resolution. Essentially, cyberspace is generating disputes. Courts aren't going to work them out. Online dispute resolution is the best way to do it. Now, I'll speak very briefly to this. How are we doing on time?
We have another hour on our end. Depends on your...
yeah, great. Excellent. You guys better get some coffee, because I'm just getting started. All right. So here's the thing. Advantages of online dispute resolution. I spoke to them slightly before, and I'm the first to admit the next slide you're going to see is actually disadvantages of online dispute resolution. So this is not, I'm not totally Pollyanna about this. You remember before I was telling you about the skepticism that face-to-face dispute resolution people have about online dispute resolution, often because they're not comfortable in the online environment. Well, they often presume that there's a choice are we going to do it online or are we going to do it face-to-face? And the first thing that I say to them to calm them down is, that is a false dichotomy. You do not have to choose between online and face-to-face. The vast majority of online dispute resolution that is happening in the United States is hybrid. So you have a face-to-face component and you have an online component. Now, on eBay, we don't have that luxury. People only have online relationships with each other. There's no possibility of two people from different states in the United States to drive or fly to get together in a room to work out a dispute over a $50 item. It's not going to happen. So we are exclusively online. But many of the applications of ODR are both face-to-face and online. And I think that that's, in some ways, the optimal way to do it. Because then when you're face-to-face, you can focus on the kinds of things that are best resolved face-to-face. Like I said before, emotional communication. However, when you're online, you can focus on the things that are best dealt with online. So let's look at some of these advantages. The first is asynchronous interaction. Now, right now, we are having a synchronous interaction. I'm talking to you. I could speak to any of you in the audience, and I could identify you by the type of shirt that you're wearing, and I could demand that you weigh in on one of the things I'm talking about and provide a response. I won't do that yet, but if I see anyone fall asleep, I'm coming after you with a vengeance. But that is a synchronous interaction. You're going to be put on the spot. When I call on you and ask you something, you're going to have to respond. And the beauty of online is that we actually can interact asynchronously, which is a lot like email or postcards or letters. We're communicating through language. When you receive a communication from me asking you to make a difficult decision, you are not expected to respond that instant. You can go talk to your wife. You can go talk to your lawyer. You can go do some research. You can think about it. You can take a walk on the beach. You can do whatever you want. And then you can come back and you can respond when you think you are best able to respond. And there are a lot of advantages to that type of interaction. One is that there's a bit of a distance there. There's a cooling distance. When you're in, I've mediated a lot of meetings face-to-face between two hot-tempered individuals, and once they get going, they are inches away from throwing punches at each other. Things can escalate very, very quickly. And online, the beauty of it is you can control that escalation much more readily because you have this asynchronous nature. So, number two, pre-communication reframing. I've been in mediations where parties have said the exact wrong thing. I often will sit down with my parties before I start to mediate with them, and I say, what are you trying to achieve here? Well, for instance, on eBay, the seller is saying, I want to sell the item, I want the buyer to be satisfied, and I want to get the money that they promised that they would send. Okay, that's your goal in this negotiation, is to achieve that. And then you get into a situation where they're communicating with each other, and the seller says to the buyer, you're a liar, and I'm going to trash you on the boards, and you're never going to buy again. And you say to the seller, that is the exact opposite of what you needed to say in order to achieve what you said your goal was for this negotiation. So the goal of a mediator often is to help reframe the communication, to focus people on a workable solution that's acceptable to both sides. And oftentimes the parties will rush out there and say something that's the exact wrong thing that moves them away from achieving that goal. The beauty of online is you can actually work with parties before they express those sentiments. And you can reality test them a little bit and say, is this really what you want to say? Is this really, do you really think this is the path towards you getting what you want? Now, in line with that is the next one, concurrent caucusing. Caucusing is where a mediator or a neutral third party will meet confidentially with both sides. So say I'm mediating a dispute between party A and party B, and they start to get into yelling at each other, and they're not making any progress at all. I say, okay, let's caucus. I send party B out into the hallway, and I sit there with party A, and I say, what's going on with you? What do you think's happening here? Are you feeling frustrated? What do you really want to achieve here? What do you think the other side? So I test with them, and I say, okay, party A, you go out in the hallway. I bring party B back in. Party B, what's going on with you? Now, I have to be very cognizant of the fact that party B, when he's sitting out in the hallway, he's probably feeling a little nervous. What's the mediator talking about with party A? Are they talking about me? You have to try and spend the same amount of time with both sides, or they start to perceive bias. The other thing is you only caucus when things are going badly. You never caucus when things are going well, because then you're going to derail a productive conversation with your caucusing. Now, online, it's very different. You can have a joint conversation going on between the two parties, party A and party B, and the mediator. You can also have another conversation that's happening at the same time between the mediator and party A. And you can have another conversation that's happening at the same time between the mediator and party B. So in this situation, you're actually having a conversation with everyone. You're having both private conversations and joint conversations at the same time. So you can actually caucus with the parties when things are going well, which is in some ways a revolutionary functionality in the public sphere, for instance, public dispute resolution sphere. So I won't get into. I can talk about this all day and all night, but you're getting a sense. Archived communication, textual communication is available online. Sometimes when you're communicating, I've been in mediations where one party has said, "What I really want is I just want $1,000," and then you mediate for an hour, and then the other party says, "Okay, I'll give you $1,000," and then that party says, "Now I want $2,000." And you go, "What? You said you wanted $1,000?" Well, they forget what they originally wanted. Their goals, the goalposts may move for them. But when you use archived communication, you can actually go and you can copy the text of what they sent in. And you can say, at the beginning of this mediation, you said, quotation mark, paste, quotation mark. And you are actually using their words back to them. And that can be a very, very powerful thing in a dispute resolution process. Verbally, you don't have that capability unless you've got a tape recorder running in your pocket all the time. And that's not a good way to spend your efforts when you're engaging with someone in a synchronous face-to-face interaction. So, and the last one that I'll mention is automated procedures, the fourth side. And this is really a revolutionary capacity of online dispute resolution. It's where technology can actually play some of the role of the mediator. Technology can suggest ideas for the parties. Technology can reality test some of the beliefs of the parties. These are the kind of things that human mediators have had to do in the past. But now we can write software programs that do them in some ways much more effectively because they're not tainted by the perceived bias or the perceived agenda of the mediator. They can be presented to parties in a really neutral way. So most of the work that I do at eBay is focused on the fourth side, these kind of automated procedures. All right, good? Shall I move on?
Yeah, wonderful. I think maybe what's more convenient for you guys, to see the text or to hear Colin? See the text. Okay. We'll continue. To see Colin? Okay. So perhaps we can shift back to you, and maybe only when you demonstrate the process itself, when you have slides. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
How about sending the slides to the following FTP? Which one? Oh,
FTP.
Okay, Michael sent you an email with the FTP.
He sent me an email. Let me check it out.
Okay. We're getting there.
We're getting there. I should be able to get you the deck as soon as the presentation is over.
Okay.
All right, well, we can try the FTP thing in a second. So let me just plow through. What else do I have here? I promised you I was going to talk about disadvantages. Let's see. Okay, let me go through this quickly. You can look at me. I'll try and look at the camera. I'll go through the rest of this text, and then I'll put it back on the screen to show you some of the slides from what we've done actually on eBay. Because I think that really makes it kind of more real, as opposed to me just talking in an amorphous way about all these concepts. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Good. All right, so let me talk about disadvantages. The first disadvantage is that ODR, terrible acronym. My wife says I'm in the odor business, which is not a very good name. It's like perfume or something like that. But the die is cast. I remember when we engaged in a discussion about what we were going to call this field, it ended up being ODR, so by default. Like I said before, nonverbal communication is actually very, very important. There are some communication theorists who have said that 50% of the meaning that we communicate is communicated through our facial expressions, our nonverbal utterances, our body language. It's telling that you guys were just listening to my voice moments ago, but you were looking at the screen. And then Orna said, well, which is more valuable, looking at Colin or looking at the text? And said, well, let's look at Colin. Well, why? Why would you look at me? You can hear my words. Everything I'm communicating to you, you're getting through the sound of my voice, right? Well, but still, you're picking something up by looking at me. I don't know what you're picking up. Hopefully it's something good, but you'll make your own call on that. But that is testament to the power of nonverbal communication. Now, I will say that the bar in terms of nonverbal communication is lowering. This, for all intents and purposes, is a purely technology-based interaction. I'm looking at you guys, you're looking at me, we're not in the same room. So very soon, it's obvious that online dispute resolution is going to be able to leverage technologies like this on a robust basis. And that's going to be really a watershed event in the online dispute resolution field. When we have low cost, high accessibility, high quality video conferencing, it's inevitable that these types of technologies are going to be utilized for ODR. So that's coming. The next thing, it's very easy for people to drop out in an online process or stonewall. It's incredibly easy. So if you're a mediator and you're working with parties and they're not in the room, every communication you send to them is coming into their instant messenger or it's coming into their email inbox, and you're competing against everything else that they have to do in their lives. So it's hard to make sure that your process, the communication regarding that dispute, rises to the top of their priority list so that they respond in a time-effective way. And if a party feels like a dispute resolution process is not in their interest, or it's getting frustrating, or they're tired of it, they'll just drop out, and they're gone. And it's very, very difficult to get them back, unless you have a way to compel them, some sort of enforcement mechanism. And on eBay, we do. On PayPal, we do. And that compels people to continue participating. But some other dispute resolution processes don't have clear enforcement mechanisms, and it's easy for people to just disappear. If you're in a face-to-face process with parties, you can lock the door. It's very, very difficult when you're in a room with the other party and a mediator to drop out and say, you know what, I'm not going to participate in this. That's a very aggressive act, and it's rare for that to happen. Online happens all the time because people don't have to deal with the consequences of it. They can just stop answering their email, and the process kind of flutters to failure. Now, here's an interesting one. In the old days of online dispute resolution, the conventional wisdom was that online people would be more likely to lie. Now, why is that? Because it takes a very special kind of person to have someone look into your eyes and ask you a question, and for you to be able to lie to their face and convince them that you are telling them the truth. Most people believe that they have built-in lie detectors in their heads or in their hearts, and they can look at somebody and they can say, I know if you're telling the truth, I know if you're telling a lie. Now online, you don't have all those cues. All the stuff that you use to determine whether or not somebody's telling you the truth, you can't measure that. You can ask somebody online, did you send me the check on Monday like you said? And they can reply, yes, I sent you the check. They can be laughing when they type that. They can be pointing at the screen and laughing and showing their friends. But the fact is, you don't know that. You don't know. So the conventional wisdom was people are going to be strategic in their online communication because they don't have the same pressures put upon them, the same face-to-face pressures. Now actually, the interesting thing is that as people have become more comfortable with online communication, and especially you see this in the younger generation, not only are people less likely to lie online, they are often far more truthful online to the point where it may even be outside the bounds of their interest, their strategic interest. You see lots and lots of examples of people saying things in email that they would never say face-to-face to another party. And that can be a danger in and of itself. So the nature of communication is being changed by these new communication channels that we have. And obviously, in the dispute resolution field, what we are doing is facilitating a certain kind of communication with the goal of reaching agreement. So the dynamics of these new communication channels definitely affect the type of services that we can provide. So that's an interesting one. The jury's kind of still out on that. And the last one I would say is privacy and confidentiality. You know, I'm telling this story about people who say things in emails that are not in their interest. There are lots of examples of people who write an email and they regret. They completely regret that they ever wrote that email. But it's out there. And once it's out there, it almost never goes away. That's the thing about the internet. Parties are often very concerned about what they type into a message form because they never know. That could go into Google and it could be there for the next 20 years. I remember I taught a class at UMass Amherst in Massachusetts, and I took pictures of all my students. And I took one picture of a woman in the class. I thought it was a perfectly fine picture, but I put it up on the class website, and she emailed me that night and said, please replace that picture with this picture. And I said, why? Why does it matter? She said, because I know if you don't, that's going to get into Google, and that picture is going to be out there for the next 10 years. And I don't want that picture out there. I want to have this picture out there. Because I don't want to think about all my old boyfriends from high school Googling me and looking up this picture and seeing that picture. I want them to see this picture. So that's a good example of people take their data very seriously, and people think when they communicate online in a reportable way, that's going to be around. So privacy and confidentiality are a significant potential downside to ODR. because people may be reluctant to engage in frank communication because they're worried that they may eventually get out and compromise them. So, questions? Does this all kind of scan and make sense? There are a lot of pluses and minuses that I didn't even cover here. I'm just trying to get the big ones.
Any questions?
All right. We can charge ahead. We got a lot more to talk about.
Yep.
I can talk all day and all night. You're never leaving. It's only midnight here. I'm just getting started. All right, good. As long as I get a couple chuckles, I feel fine. All right. Let me just give you a sense of what's been going on a global basis. I'm not going to show you these slides. Let's see. All right, two more slides. I'll speak to them very quickly. Orna just mentioned that we were just in Cairo. That was the 4th United Nations Working Group on Online Dispute Resolution. We've had meetings in Geneva. The one before Cairo was in Melbourne, Australia. They're having meetings all the time on online dispute resolution. I just heard today the Asian Domain Name Dispute Resolution Program in Hong Kong is holding an ODR conference, and they're inviting all the Asian providers, because right now there's a ton of Asian providers that are cropping up. We just had a big online dispute resolution meeting in Toledo, Ohio, which was the 5th anniversary of ICODER, which is the international competition in online dispute resolution. And if that sounds interesting to you, if you'd like to participate in a competition, just talk to Orna. I'm not sure if you guys have fielded a team before, but it's a really interesting exercise to get involved in. It exposes you to some of the cutting-edge tools in ODR. Like I said, in the 1999, 2000, 2001 timeframe, there were a lot of ODR efforts that cropped up. And in reaction to that, there were lots of standards that were issued by international organizations. Everybody from Consumers International to the Global Business Dialogue on E-commerce, to the American Bar Association, to the International Chamber of Commerce. All these agencies said, wow, online dispute resolution is growing quickly. We need to issue standards that will help regulate this to ensure that any ODR services that emerge are fair, balanced, legitimate. So there are lots of standards efforts that have occurred all over the world. Some of them government-sponsored. The Department of Commerce and Federal Trade Commission in the United States has been very active in this area. The EU has been very active in this area. I don't know, you guys would have to tell me if there's been anything in Israel, but my sense is now that Orna is there planting seeds, ODR is starting to blossom. I've gotten a couple emails from people in Israel who are very interested in ODR. I know that Israel is definitely a place where there's a lot of technology innovation going on. So I think it's inevitable that there's going to be online dispute resolution services that emerge in Israel as well. It's just a matter of time. So the reason why I say all this is to give you a sense of how quickly things are moving. Online dispute resolution is only 6 or 7 years old, but we probably have, I think there's 150 providers around the world now who are providing online dispute resolution services. And as I said before, we here at eBay are doing 35 million disputes a year. I mean, if you weigh that case volume against even the American judicial system, you'll see that, and we're growing at a 30% a year rate. And now we're launching, on May 17th, we're launching PayPal dispute resolution. PayPal is a payments company that's connected to eBay, but it's trying to become the global payment standard. So now we're going to have more disputes coming in through the PayPal platform. So things are growing very, 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 very quickly. And the theory is emerging very quickly. So it gives you a sense of where we are, where we're going. The last thing I'll say before I get into the eBay slides is when we first launched ODR, our vision was very much an extension of the face-to-face dispute resolution field, which is where online dispute resolution services would be provided by third-party companies. So say you're IBM and you're selling laptops, and you have people buying laptops from you online. Our vision would be that IBM would not build an online dispute resolution system because IBM is a party. IBM is the seller and the consumer is the buyer. They would need to contract to a third-party organization that would provide online dispute resolution, fair, effective online dispute resolution. Well, what we're seeing now, instead of this being a legion of third-party companies that are contracted by the companies that are really doing the selling, we're starting to see dispute resolution integrated into marketplaces like eBay, or integrated into trade associations who want to ensure the trustworthiness of all of the members of the trade association, or inserted into insurance company partnerships, subrogation, where insurance companies work out claims payouts between them. Well, they agree on using ODR. Or in the United States right now, the National Science Foundation has made a very large grant to the National Mediation Board, which is a labor management group, labor management agency within the federal government, and they're using online dispute resolution to essentially negotiate contracts between airlines and pilots unions, things like that. So online dispute resolution is kind of in an integration phase. I think the ultimate aspiration for ODR is not to be some kind of whiz-bang technology that's run by a small cloister of companies that own it, but it becomes something that's just integrated into all the transaction flows all around the world. Not only transaction flows, but collective bargaining agreements or everywhere. ODR just becomes part of the infrastructure. And that's what I think we see is happening in ODR. It's no longer something that even raises an eyebrow. It's just part of building out the capacity that needs to exist in the online world. So, okay, now I'm at the eBay part. You survived. Any questions?
None yet.
Maybe it's time for Orna to do that dance that she offered.
At the end.
Oh, come on. Okay, we'll do it at the end. All right, now zoom me back here. I'm sending you back to my screenshots. This is the video game portion of the presentation where I get to... Oh, no, that's me. All right. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, perfect.
All right, great. So now I'm going to take you through some of the screenshots of the stuff that I've built. Now, on eBay, the beauty is we have a lot of disputes, but they're usually a fairly small range of disputes, different types of disputes. So, and I mentioned this before, eBay is very large. These statistics are actually out of date. So, 163 million users, that's now 185 million users. And I told you about, eBay or a country. But I also mentioned eBay's role is unique because eBay is not the buyer or the seller. We don't hold any product. So our job is just to ensure the marketplace runs smoothly. Now this graphic in the upper right is a good indication of kind of how eBay's attitude towards the marketplace has evolved. When I first got here, eBay saw themselves as a referee, right? And anybody who likes football or any sport knows nobody likes the referee. Nobody ever leaves a sporting event going, wow, what great referee. That was really well done. So the problem is, when eBay intercedes as the referee, the parties don't communicate anymore. All the communication comes through eBay. So what I wanted to do was make eBay more of a convener. So the buyer and the seller are the people who are the agents who are going to work out the problem. If they've got a dispute over a collectible vase from Louis XIV era France, and there's a crack in one of the handles, eBay does not want to be the organization that is deciding that dispute. We know nothing about Louis XIV era vases, whereas the parties, the buyer and the seller, they probably know everything about that. They've seen the item. They are the ones who are best capable of finding an acceptable solution to that dispute, not some customer service representative that eBay refers into the dispute and empowers with 15 minutes to decide. So what I want to do is play more of a convening role. Now, have any of you read Getting the Yes by Fisher and Yuri?
No, they haven't. They haven't. I've given them some background on distributive versus integrative negotiation.
Integrative, sure. Well, that's kind of the text in dispute resolution in the United States. There's probably something equivalent in literature over there, but the language that Fisher and Yuri, the reason why that text is so commonly cited as influential is because it's a very slim book, it's very easy to read, and a lot of the advice that they came up with is very catchy. So you'll see tips, and you can't really see here, well let's see, I'll zoom in a little bit more. The tips that Fisher and Yuri suggest for people to work out their disputes, you'll see them on eBay. I have integrated them into a lot of the processes that we have. Presume good faith from the other side. Focus on the problem, not the person. Threats and insults almost always backfire. This stuff is not brain surgery for anybody who's been connected to dispute resolution. But the orientation that eBay has taken in the past did not emphasize trying to find agreement. It was usually about who's right and who's wrong. I'll give you an example. When I first got to eBay, the number one kind of dispute that they had, they called deadbeat buyer disputes. Deadbeat buyer disputes. And that was where a buyer committed to purchase an item but they didn't pay. So a seller would file a deadbeat buyer notice, and then the buyer would then essentially be... Now, why is that not good? Well, the reason that's not good is because you're already saying who's wrong. If it's a deadbeat buyer process, the buyer is in the wrong. what's the point of the buyer winning? The buyer can't win that dispute because they're the deadbeat buyer. So the next step from that was we changed it to a non-paying bidder dispute, which is better because we're not calling the seller a deadbeat anymore, which is nice. But even that's not so good because you're still accusing the buyer of doing something. So I was lucky enough to rename the process the unpaid item dispute. So this is not brain surgery, right? You're focusing on the problem. The problem is the item is not paid for. The problem is not that the buyer is a bad guy. The buyer, accusing the buyer does not get you any closer to resolution. There are many legitimate reasons for a buyer not to pay for an item on eBay, but the old process did not allow for that. The new name does, because we can solve that problem. This item is unpaid, we need to get it paid. That's something that the buyer and the seller can work together to achieve. I'll give you another example. The other kind of dispute that we have on the site that was very common is item not received disputes. That's what I've named them, item not received disputes. That used to be called the fraud alert process. Yeah, I mean, it's funny in retrospect, but that was what everybody called it. I'm going to go file a fraud alert. So if you file a fraud alert, what mindset are you in? The mindset you're in is, I'm being defrauded. This seller is a criminal. They should go to jail. When in fact, it may be that they sent the item, and it got delivered, and your kid received it, signed for it, put it in the garage, and didn't tell you. So there are a lot of, changing the language can go a long way towards working out these problems. Okay, I told you I was going to go through these screenshots quickly, and I'm violating my agreement with you, so let me go more quickly here. So, it used to be called the Security Center on eBay, and now it's called the Security and Resolution Center. And we emphasize, you got a problem? We can help you out. Tell us what your problem is. This is the problem diagnosis phase. Okay, you have an item you haven't received? Great, well, let's talk about it. When did you purchase the item? Where's the seller? Oh, well, the seller's in Italy, and you're in the United States. The average ship time from Italy to the United States is 2.5 weeks. It's only been a week and a half, so you might want to wait a little bit longer. So that's what we're emphasizing, problem diagnosis. We have created for every member on eBay something called the Dispute Console. This is connected to My eBay, which is your central page that tracks all the items you've won, all the items you're selling. And this page here, it tracks all the disputes you're engaged in. It shows you updated status, it shows you who the other side is, it shows you what item it involves, and it even shows you if you're eligible to escalate it to a claim or to get a reimbursement, all with that little checkbox there. So you can click on View Dispute for any of these disputes, and then you dive down into, well, I'll show you one more screen, this here, which is the substance of a dispute. The buyer and seller communicate back and forth on the platform, trying to work out the problem. If they can't work it out, they escalate it to a customer service representative, who then can review the communication that they've engaged in on the site. One of the things that we can do is, if the seller gives us a tracking number for that package, when the buyer reports the problem, we will actually go to the shipping company's website, and we will get updated tracking information for that item, and then we will present it to the buyer. And the buyer will say, I haven't got my item. And we'll say, well, the seller gave us this tracking ID. It says it left their warehouse on this date. Right now, it's in here, and it's going to arrive on your doorstep in X number of days. We can resolve a lot of disputes that way, and that's purely technology. There's no human mediator involved. Let me go back one screen. This is the initiation screen for the item not received process. And we have a variety of dispute resolution processes that we've built that deal with different dispute types. So like I said, we got a lot of disputes on eBay, but the beauty of it is they're usually the same kind of dispute over and over again. And because we've seen so many of them, we can be very proactive in suggesting ways to resolve those disputes, because we've learned from all the other ones that we've dealt with. All right, now, this is SquareTrade. SquareTrade is our primary third-party dispute resolution partner. And there are some disputes that we won't resolve ourselves. Some of those disputes are disputes over feedback. Feedback disputes are very contentious. And eBay's attitude is we will never verify the accuracy of a feedback, because we do not want to have responsibility for the kinds of things that buyers and sellers are saying about each other. eBay's relationship to the feedback system is that of a publisher. So we don't go in and vet these feedbacks. If a buyer leaves a feedback for a seller that says, he told me I have a face like a weasel, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. We don't know. We're not going to go in and look at the emails and determine whether or not he actually told him that he had a face like a weasel. He can say whatever he wants. In some countries, that's considered slander, and there can be legal actions taken on the basis of public information that is written about another person. eBay does not want to get into the process of vetting these feedback comments for accuracy. We've had more than 4 billion of these feedbacks left on the site. If we were vetting these feedbacks, that's all we do, all day and all night. So SquareTrade handles all of our feedback disputes. We refer those cases over to this third-party organization, and they actually provide human mediators that will work with disputes to try and work out their problems. And if they can mutually reach agreement about a feedback that they want to get it removed, eBay will enforce that. eBay will take that action on their behalf because they achieved that outcome through SquareTrade. All right, a couple other things. Now, this is too small for you to read. This is independent feedback review. This is an arbitration. Well, we don't call it arbitration because it obviously has legal ramifications. We call this an evaluative process, but we work with third parties in this process as well. This is not a mediation. This is not a negotiation. The buyer and the seller are compelled to participate in this process if they bid on or buy a car, a passenger vehicle, through the eBay Motors site in the U.S. and Canada. eBay is the #1 seller of used cars in the United States. And we have a lot of automotive transactions. So if you get a negative feedback and you are an automotive seller, that can be decimating. That can be devastating for your business. So we have a process we put together called independent feedback review that allows for you to get that feedback that you got that you don't think you deserve. You can get that reviewed by a third party. And one of the third parties we work with is a company called Net Neutrals. And they are the #1 automotive dispute resolution company in the United States. All of their neutrals that they provide are certified technicians. They know everything about cars. So again, this is a big advantage of ODR. If we at eBay were to be resolving these disputes, we don't have automotive expertise. We can't say whether or not the car's carburetor was good or bad, but we can refer them to Net Neutrals, and all those mediators are automotive experts.
So, Colin, how does a process like this actually, the evaluation, how does that work?
So I'll tell you how it works. When in the bidding process, a buyer wants to place a bid or do a buy it now for a car, they get a message in that process that says, please note that if you bid on this car or buy this car, you will need to abide by an independent feedback review if deemed necessary by either you or the other side. So that's one issue. We can talk about that because that's very controversial in the United States. Pre-dispute binding dispute resolution processes are very controversial. And we crossed that Rubicon in this particular process because of the asymmetric valuation of feedback in motors. Which means, if you're a buyer and you're buying a lot of stuff on the site, you're buying a video game, you're buying pencils, you're buying a backpack, you're buying shoes, it's not that hard for you to get a lot of positive feedback. But if you're a seller and you're selling cars, if you get 50 positive feedback in a month, that means you're selling 50 cars a month. That's a lot of, each feedback for you is immensely valuable, whereas the feedback for the buyer in that situation is not that valuable. So what we started to see is sellers in the automotive category were getting extorted by their buyers. The buyers were saying, well, I got the car, it's just as you advertised it, but I want a spoiler on the back of my car. I know you didn't say in the original listing I was going to get a spoiler, but if you don't give me a spoiler, I'm going to give you a negative feedback. And the sellers of cars, they understand that each negative feedback has a dollar value for them. And it's probably in excess of $1,000. If you get a negative feedback and you're an automotive seller, and you lose one buyer on one of your cars, that could mean you're saying goodbye to thousands and thousands of dollars. So sellers realized they had to do it, and they would often give in to buyer extortion on these transactions. So the motors category came to us and said, can you please build us a process that will allow us to review these feedbacks to ensure that they were not given in an abusive manner or an unreasonable manner. So we worked with 3 providers, Net Neutrals, SquareTrade, and the Better Business Bureau, to come up with guidelines for the evaluation of the feedback in the motors category, passenger vehicle category. So if a buyer or a seller, they want to have an independent feedback review, they go to one of these providers, they request the process, they have to pay, it's very expensive, it's $100, but that's okay because for automotive transactions, we're talking about thousands of dollars, so they're usually willing to pay that. And then they get a neutral that's going to essentially listen to one side, listen to the other side, look at the feedback, evaluate it against the guidelines that we jointly come up with, and then render a decision about whether or not that feedback is warranted. And if they determine the feedback is not warranted, we do not remove it from the eBay site. What we do is descore it so that it becomes neutral. It has no impact on the overall score for the seller or the buyer, whoever it's removed from. But the comment remains, and that means that we still have transparency into the process in case somebody wants to go see it. That's probably way more information than you wanted to know, but
there's actually another question, I think. Yeah. There's a question on at what stage did eBay actually start with ODR? It was right after the pilot, right?
That's right. Your history is good. Ethan Cash is really the father of ODR. I mean, Orno was very charitable to call me a pioneer, but really Ethan was the guy who founded the whole thing. He did a pilot with an auction site in, I think it was 98, 99, yeah.
And when was eBay? eBay started in...
eBay started 10 years ago last year, so 95.
95.
So eBay's only 11 years old. We're about to have our 11th anniversary.
But feedback they had from the very beginning, right? Or
that's right. Pierre ODR, when he started the site, he created feedback. And actually, if you ask Pierre, if you read the book, The Perfect Store, which is kind of a bio of eBay, Pierre said the reason why he started feedback was because he was spending way too much of his time resolving disputes between buyers and sellers on eBay. So he wanted to come up with an automated process that he felt could help people work out these problems proactively. So that was why he created the feedback system. So a reputation system is very helpful in working with parties to resolve their problems, but it's not going to solve the problem in its entirety. But I think, so that was Pierre's genius. That was probably why eBay became eBay, is because he had that insight at the beginning to focus on the community and build a viable reputation system. But the question of when did the ODR start on eBay? So it really started in 98, 99, and that was when Ethan actually was approached by a couple law school students who were in law school in Ohio, and they had started an auction site. I think they called it Up for Sale, and they were interested in the law and technology aspects. So they said, great, let's do a dispute resolution process, because we realize we're having disputes on this auction site. I think they got something like 60 or 70,000 users, which at the time was a pretty good volume. This is very early on the internet. And they approached Ethan and said, will you put this together for us? Ethan said, okay. So they did a pilot, and they were about to launch it, and then eBay bought Up for Sale. So these law school students suddenly found themselves, they had tens of millions of dollars, because eBay bought it for a ridiculous amount of money. And they flew them out to San Jose, and they were interviewing with eBay, and they said, we were just about to do this pilot with the Center for Information Technology Dispute Resolution. Would you be interested in doing it on eBay? And the eBay guys said, oh yeah, that's not a bad idea. Okay, we'll do it. So what they did was they put one link to CITDR, the Center for Information Technology Dispute Resolution. They put a link on a help page that said, if you have a dispute, go here and tell them about the dispute, and they'll help you work it out. And they put that link up, and it wasn't promoted, it was never advertised, but in that first month, they got about 600 or 700 disputes. Buyers and sellers who just had issues, they were looking for help working it out. They found it on the eBay website. So from the standpoint of Ethan Cash and UMass, whoa, that was a lot of volume. They only had one person resolving these disputes, and they were swamped. But they realized there was a real demand for this service. So actually they spun off, they worked with another company that was starting up called SquareTrade. It was called TransSecure originally, but they became SquareTrade. And SquareTrade has now done more than 2 million disputes for eBay since that time. And I joined actually end of 2003, and the dispute resolution processes I've built on the site, those are the ones that have handled the 35 million disputes. And the bulk of those disputes are unpaid item disputes. So unpaid item disputes are seller initiated, but they're not really that big a deal in the scheme of things, because the seller's not going to ship their item until they get paid. So the seller still has the item. The buyer just hasn't paid. And really, it's an administrative process where the seller tries to get the fees that they've paid eBay for that listing back, or they try and get the buyer to pay. The more serious disputes, and I see a question there, but more serious disputes are item not received or significantly not as described disputes. And that's where the buyer pays for an item and doesn't get it, that's item not received, or they pay for an item and then they get an item, but it's significantly different than the description. And that may be as significant as they pay for a laptop and they get a brick, or they get a phone book. And that happens occasionally. So those are real fraud disputes, and the buyer is out the money that they paid. So those disputes are rarer, but they are much more in-depth, much more complicated. So, all right, questions?
We have a few more questions.
Sure.
Hi. How many people are employed in the ODR system?
Well, let's see. I am the only official dispute resolution employee at eBay, but I work on a team that has lots and lots of people. Trust and safety at eBay probably has somewhere between 700 and 1,000 people. So
it's a lot less people than disputes.
Definitely true, and that's one of the reasons why we rely so heavily on technology. We do partner with outside organizations, but I think Square Trade's panel is only about, I don't know, a couple hundred people. So we're not talking about a lot of mediators. We're not talking about thousands and thousands of mediators. We do have more than, I think, around the world, 5,000 customer service representatives. And a lot of the customer service representatives who field these calls and answer the emails, they do dispute resolution type things. They're trying to help people work out their problems. But they explicitly don't do mediation. We have processes that we've built to handle that. So, all right, more questions?
Yeah.
Bring it on.
I received two questions. First, what is eBay's success rate in the automated negotiation processes?
Great question.
Perhaps even what is eBay's success rate, and then Square Trade along the various.
Square Trade is a little harder. They don't actually provide us full transparency on what they do, and I actually welcome that. I think it's good for them to have their own relationships with users. I will tell you, for instance, the item not received process. Actually, the item not received and significantly not as described process is a combined process. Those are most of the buyer-initiated disputes we have on eBay. Now, the volume that we get in, there are essentially 4 different outcomes that I track through my dispute resolution process. The thumbnail that we talked about for face-to-face dispute resolution, a benchmark for success, is about a 60 or 70% resolution rate. That's a very good resolution rate. And I'm pleased to announce that on eBay, of the incoming volume we receive for item not received significantly not as described, we amicably resolve 85% of those disputes. Meaning the buyer tells us that their problem has been completely resolved and that we don't need to take any action against the seller, or the dispute times out, which means that the buyer initiates the dispute process and they never escalate it to the next phase. And then we let the dispute go 90 days, then we time it out. Now, why does that happen? The reason why that happens is because number one type of dispute we get in that bin is item not received disputes where the buyer jumps the gun and they say, I didn't get the item. And then 3 days later, the item arrives. So their expectations were out of whack. The item arrived. Now, what incentive do they have to come back and tell eBay that the item arrived? They don't really have much incentive at all. So what we often see is that buyers will just let their dispute time out and end. So between those two closure types, that's 85% of our incoming volume. And then another 10% roughly are disputes that are very low dollar value, usually less than $20 US. And we actually don't allow those to be escalated to a claim just because it costs us more than that to process those cases. So only 5% of the incoming volume actually makes it to an agent or review. And then, and then only roughly half of those actually get paid out because we determined that the buyer actually was defrauded. So the vast majority of the cases that come into ODR are resolved amicably. And I think those are very powerful statistics for the effectiveness of these systems. And actually what we've seen is the effectiveness creeps up over time because buyers and sellers get more savvy about how to use the tools, and then we learn from all the disputes that happen on the platform about how to refine them so they're more effective. So.
Great.
All right.
A few more questions, or do we want to?
Sure.
Yeah. When a buyer, or seller has been defrauded, are they, if they didn't insure the transaction, are they out of the money, or is there any other avenue for redress?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. It used to be that eBay had an insurance model for protecting buyers in the case where, say they got defrauded by somebody and the seller takes off. But now, eBay, we have what we call protection programs. So the best protection we have, we have a new website that we've launched in the United States called eBay Express. And eBay Express has full protection. So So what that means is, you as a buyer, you can try and work it out with your seller, and if you can't work it out with them, then eBay will pay you back the full amount of your payment, no matter how much it is. We also have, for the majority of transactions on the site, something called PayPal buyer protection. So if you pay with PayPal, you're covered up to $1,000. And then there are lower levels of protection as well. So if you as a buyer make the decision to buy from a really new seller, they don't have a very good established reputation, they haven't engaged in many transactions, you may decide that that additional risk is worth it. You may get a better price, for instance, because a lot of people aren't going to want to bid from that person. So in that case, you may get to be covered under what we call our standard purchase protection program, which is essentially $200 worth of coverage with a $20 filing fee. So there are lots of different levels of protection, and users will often find the level of protection that they're most comfortable with. We still do have an insurance model on PayPal, for instance, where you can say at the time of purchase, you know what, I want to buy a money-back guarantee for this item. And it depends on the purchase price of the item, but it's probably $1 or $2 or $3. And if something goes wrong, then you just go to PayPal and say, you know what, I got money-back guarantee on this, I'm not happy with the item. PayPal will give you your money. So that comes out of PayPal's pocket, not out of the seller's pocket.
Great.
All right, more questions? Come on, give me some hard ones. Look alive, people. Warning for you.
Can you please tell us about complaints or suits against online mediators or Square?
I think that's a very good question. To date, I do not know of one lawsuit against an online mediator. Orna, maybe you can correct me because Orna's done a lot of research on this. But I think I think it was a domain name case that was appealed to a court.
That maybe, with respect to Square Trade, I know that they have received complaints occasionally, and it's quite easy for them to look into them because they have the full record of the mediation.
Right.
And they are proactive as well as reactive in ensuring quality control. But I'm not sure, I would imagine there are complaints in the domain name disputes, but I'm not familiar with them.
I don't know of any precedent where an online mediator or online dispute resolution service has been sued in a court of law. Before I came to eBay, I ran a dispute resolution company, and I mentioned before, it was called Online Resolution. We focused on business-to-business transactions, really between $2,000 and really $200,000. So kind of below the radar of the court system, but above kind of the e-commerce level. And what we asserted was, what we were doing was essentially an online analog to face-to-face dispute resolution. So we claimed all of the same protections that face-to-face mediators had, which is we were prevented from testifying, we had the same confidentiality protections, we had all of our mediators were experienced face-to-face mediators who abided by the same standards of practice that they abided in online. So we never had that tested. Although, interestingly enough, we did get a call once from the, the Texas Office of Extrajudicial Affairs or something like that. And they said that it was unauthorized practice of law. They said, you guys are engaging in the unauthorized practice of law. And fortunately, there's been a lot of precedent. I'm sorry?
Texas was very active on this front.
They were. Yeah, Texas. I'm from Texas, I can say that. They're always getting wound up about something or other. But they came after us and they said, you're engaging in the unauthorized practice of law. Fortunately, A, we've never done a case in Texas, so that was good. eBay doesn't have that protection because we've done cases everywhere. But B, we were doing the same thing that, they were going after face-to-face mediation companies as well. I mean, they were essentially, it was the bar defending its turf. And as we see dispute resolution expand, we're going to see more of that. We're going to see a lot of traditional judicial mechanisms, I think, say, wait a minute. We don't know what to do with this. For instance, they're negotiating right now. There's a treaty, the Hague Conference on Private International Law, which is doing a lot of discussion right now about locus of disputes. Is it the location of the seller? Is it the location of the buyer? Now you got the whole e-commerce thing thrown in there. So it's very complicated. But as far as I know, there's never been a legal case dealing with an online dispute resolution firm.
It's also quite difficult to sue a face-to-face mediator. Many of them enjoy immunity in the U.S., and these are quite difficult to prove. It's interesting. They would be easier to prove in online textual communication, actually. You would have more data.
Well, right, that's right. Yeah, they could get their hands on the records. If I can't delete it first.
Another question, please. I just you've told us about a video conference. How do you look to the future? You've told us about going to video conference or something like that. Do you think that there are some other directions that might happen in the future, or
all right, well,
other than video conference?
How much can I blow your minds? Let's see. What do I think you guys are capable of handling? So maybe I won't go to the hovercrafts and the chips in our brain yet. I won't go that far because you're probably not going to buy into that. But I will say, here's some ideas. Okay, let me just throw these out. You guys are legal scholars. Think about this. What if you had a court system that was convened online and you could have a jury of 1,000 people? Why not? Face to face, that's completely impractical. But why wouldn't you have a jury of 100 people, 1,000 people? And maybe you would only pick people who have expertise in that area, right? And they would all be anonymous. No one would know in the courtroom who was actually serving on that jury. And then maybe the jury wouldn't have to reach consensus. Maybe it would have to be 65% of the people in the jury would have to decide one way or the other, agree, and then that would be the outcome. Okay, that's one idea. What about if every civil court would require parties, before they could get a civil court date, to go through an online mechanism? Say, and I'm tipping all my cards here, so if anybody patents this, I'm going to be mad at you. But you can patent it in Israel, I'm not going to go to Israel anyway. Patent all that stuff. What if you had, in traffic court, for instance, you had a little online map, and you could create a diagram of the accident? And then both sides could actually submit. You could create an animated version of what happened in the accident. And then you would use a rules engine that would apply the law. The traffic laws would be interpreted into essentially computer code. And that computer code would be able to determine to a 95% degree of certainty who was in the right and who was in the wrong in that particular circumstance. And then the parties could either agree to abide by that outcome, which was rendered by the computer, or they could make the decision to proceed on to a magistrate or a judge who would then review the information that was submitted and then render a decision, maybe that has an additional layer of complexity that the parties aren't comfortable with. But that would be something that the party would have to pay an additional amount to get access to. What about online judges? What about coming up with artificial intelligence-based computers that can interpret the laws in a contextualized way? You can actually ask the parties to weigh their preferences for all the various things that need to be resolved in a matter. That can be factored in with the artificial intelligence, and we would essentially have robo-judges, electronic judges. It's funny, in the legal profession, when you talk to somebody about, what do you think the law in 2020 is going to look like? They always think in such closed-minded ways, like, maybe we'll have e-filings, Ooh, e-filings. Wow, boy, that's like the Jetsons. No. The way that we resolve disputes is, it's incredibly primitive. It's incredibly oriented around these rules that we've come up with, as if the rules are the basis of truth themselves. I think technology is going to enable us way more flexibility to think about how we can resolve these problems. And not only render a decision in the courtroom, but also follow up with a decision and make sure that it's still working down the line, and then facilitate re-entry of the parties back into the process should an agreement break down. So I think that I love when I first got in the field, it made me very angry that we were called alternative dispute resolution, because why are we the alternative? I mean, there's a court system out there, and then everything else is alternative, and that seems very simple-minded to me. The beauty of online dispute resolution is that it is not an alternative. The court system does not work online. So really, the only system you're going to get access to is the kind of system that you can innovate and build through ODR. So anyway, that's my thinking. You want more, you buy more.
You mentioned earlier when speaking about the international conferences, setting standards to ODR. So what are, if you have determined, I guess you have determined some standards that eBay is trying to promote for ODR, and how do you perceive your liability for keeping these standards?
Well, very good question. I would clarify that when I'm speaking to you guys, oftentimes when I talk about standards and I talk about what I see as ethical ODR systems design, I'm not speaking for eBay. eBay is not promulgating any standards for ODR. We have our internal standards. You know, we want to build systems that are world-class, and we want to make sure that we maintain fairness in the marketplace. The beauty of eBay is when you launch something, you have 160 million eyes that are watching that launch. And they will give you instant and immediate feedback if they think that something is fair or unfair. eBay is very community-oriented, so our truth tellers, our checks and balances are the community members that use these processes every day by the tens of thousands. So eBay is, in some ways, they refer to it as the walled garden. What matters to eBay is what happens inside eBay. But I do think about ODR writ large, I mean on the broader internet, in international marketplaces. I think about those standards quite a bit. And some of the standards efforts I think have been very, very well considered. Others I think have been kind of hastily put together and ill-advised. I think some of the early standards that were issued were based on a very narrow definition of what ODR could be. For instance, they all presumed third-party online dispute resolution companies, as opposed to in-house dispute resolution processes like what I've done on eBay. So if you read the ethical guidelines that were written, what's a good example? By the American Bar Association E-Commerce Task Force, which was talking about e-commerce ODR very early on, they came out essentially with two big recommendations. One is independence, and one is trust marks, trust seals, neither of which has any value at all for eBay. So as I build these internal online dispute resolution systems, that effort is really not applicable to the types of systems that I'm building. But the International Standards Organization right now is engaged in another standard-setting effort for online dispute resolution. And I'm trying very hard to broaden their minds, broaden their perspective a little bit so that they can think more broadly about ODR, so they don't end up in the same box. So I think your point is very well taken. I believe that ODR systems need to be transparent, they need to be fair, they need to be accessible. I mean, those are kind of the core tenets of everything that I do in the field. And everything that we do in ODR needs to grow out of the body of knowledge and wisdom that we've developed in the face-to-face ADR field. And, you know, saying that the ODR is totally different than ADR and then we should just clear the decks and start from scratch, I think that's very, very short-sighted. So, that's my personal opinion.
There aren't any other questions. There don't seem to be.
There we go.
I think we can let you, we can say goodnight. And
okay, what time is it? Late?
Midnight your time, I think. Thank you.
That's right. I'm just going to curl right up under the desk here to go to sleep.
Colin, thank you very, very much. It was fascinating as usual and entertaining. And we hope to see you again in our future courses.
Thank you very much, Orna. Now, what about that dance?
Oh, on my way out.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good day.